Well, after a rather troubling conversation with an interesting necromancer, to say the least, I decided to paint up a standard bearer for my skeleton horsemen to lead them all into glorious battle. First, it was the assembly, and this is just a box of Tomb Kings of Khemri horsemen, just without using the Egyptian themed bits in there. Then it was time to remove some of the mold lines, and I didn't realize this at the time, but I got a little bit carried away removing the mold line on the horse's skull, and this wouldn't become apparent until later on painting it. And then I glued it together before gluing it to its base. I was deciding on which skull to go for the top of the flagpole, and I ended up going for the horse skull. I just think it looks a little bit more kind of sinister. So here it is next to a completed test model that I'd done a few days before, and the shield on the test model is just the Khemri shield that I've just trimmed and snipped down to make it fit a little bit better. I noticed all the left arms in this box don't hold any weapons, they just have a clenched fist, and this is where a shield is generally supposed to go, and all the weapons are in the right arms. So since he's holding onto the flag in his right arm, I decided I wanted to give him a weapon instead of a shield, and to do this I just went and got a spare right arm, chopped the axe off, and then just glued it onto the left arm, and I just think it makes him look a little bit more threatening just if he has an axe instead of a shield. Once I finished shaking up the rattle can to take it outside and prime it, I took one step outside and... Now I'm fairly convinced taking a model outside to spray it generally causes some kind of weather event. So these flag designs have those little vertical strips at the top of the flag. This is what wraps around the T-piece on the flagstaff. However, this flagstaff, or that little horizontal piece of bone that's going to be holding the flag, has those 4 little raised areas. I just had to remark those vertical strips on the flag design just so they line up with those raised little 4 raised bits on the bone, just so they wrap around there. I then just cut the flag out just a little bit bigger than the flag itself, small enough to tape it down to a hard surface to paint on, but big enough that any mistakes can be trimmed off later when I actually cut the actual shape of the flag out. So before I started painting the flag, I just gave it a few thin coats of a matte varnish spray that I picked up from an art store, and this just helps seal in the card and just prevents that ink from soaking into the card and making it all soft and mushy, and this in turn would make it very difficult to paint. Even though it is quite thick card, it's still going to soak up any liquid. To paint the flag itself, I used Nostalgia 94's range of inks with red and yellow, and then mixing an orange in between just to give that bit of a mid-tone that I can switch between to help blending the colours of the flames. And you can see in the background there, I just have the Undead Army book just so I have something to reference off as I'm painting the flag. As you can see on the flag here, there's those 4 black strips at the top of the flag, so those were the new strips I had to mark out, and those are the ones that are going to be wrapping around those raised areas on that piece of bone on the flagpole that we saw earlier. You can see the yellow ink going on to the tops of the flames on the flag here. I began to add more red into the orange just to really intensify those colours just at the bottom of the skull where the long teeth are. When it come to do the skull, I just used Flesh Wash from Nostalgia 94, and I just thinned this right down with not much on my brush and built it up over several layers, just using the white background to sort of create the natural highlights of the skull, trying to follow the artwork that was in the book. You can see what it looks like here in real time. It is a fairly slow process, but I was completely okay with that. In fact, I have to say, out of this whole project, this was probably the most therapeutic, enjoyable part of it, and this was actually the part I was probably the most afraid of doing. So for the parchment itself, I just used brown ink, and this was diluted quite a lot, and again, I didn't have much on my brush, just concentrating those thinner layers, the same as I did with the skull, towards the center of the parchment. And where the parchment folds, I just used more and more less diluted brown ink, and just concentrating more of the pure ink straight into the deeper parts of the folds, just to create those more warmer shadows, and following as best as I could to what I was seeing in the book. I used some black ink just to go into the eye sockets, the nose, as well as the text on the parchment, and then just switched over to some black paint and just did the background. So here's the flag all painted, and I just took it outside and gave it a few more coats of that matte spray varnish that I used before painting as well, and I found this just brought everything together and sealed it all in nicely and gave it a nice smooth finish. And the 4 strips at the top there do look a bit wide and uneven, but I did paint a little bit extra on there just in case I needed to trim a little extra off to make it fit around those raised areas. Then it was time to paint the horse, and you can see I have a few of them here. This was because I was working on a few of them as well, but the recipe is still the same. And after ducking outside when there was a break in the weather, I gave them a quick hit of white primer and then gave the 50-50 mix of Battle Mud Wash and Bone Wash from 2 thin coats. After adding some more water to the wash just to help it go a little further, I made sure to let most of it settle in the recesses. And then after that, I just went in with some Vallejo's Bone White and started to base coat over all the bone areas, avoiding those deeper recesses. I then went and mixed 50-50 Bone White and Off-White and just mixed in a touch of water as well, and just placing this mainly towards the edges of the bones before moving on to Off-White and doing the same thing, just thinning it down and placing it even further towards the edges. It's basically the same bone recipe that I used for my archers as well, only this was probably a bit more controlled and a bit more sort of thin, again building it up over multiple thinner layers to get the highlight. And our lovely flag bearer was given the exact same recipe, done in the same way. So to paint the skull on top of the flagstaff, I decided to use a bit of a different recipe. And I was flipping through the How to Paint Warhammer Armies book. It's the older one from the 90s, I believe it is. And in there they mention mixing bleach bone and snakebite leather to form a base coat for the skull. Now I am using the Nostalgia 94 equivalents, but I mixed these in a 50-50 mix to create the base coat. So when it came time to highlight the skull on top of the flagstaff, I did deviate from the recipe a little bit here, and instead I wanted to try my hand at glazing up the highlights, just using lots and lots of thin layers. And to do this, I just thinned down some bleached bone with water, and it's a little bit difficult to describe the exact consistency, but it was very, very thin, and I made sure that there was barely any on my brush at all. And if you can see, it looks like nothing is being painted on the skull, but it does take quite a lot of time, and I also forgot how many layers this took. It did take quite a lot of layers, but it was just a matter of perseverance and just being patient with the process. So here's a completed skull with its highlights and a nice deep gouge at the front from when I was removing the mold lines. Yeah, I've come too far. We'll just pretend it's not there. And we'll go back to the recipe in the book, which was chestnut ink and brown ink, and then putting this into the deeper recesses and then feathering them out with a second brush. And I haven't done this before, but we'll see how we go. To paint the gold decoration on top of the flagstaff just above the skull, I just mixed in a little bit of chestnut ink into the Troll Trader's counterfeit gold, and this was quite a common recipe that I've come across in some of the older painting guides for just enriching the gold colour a little bit, and this went straight over the white undercoat. I then went over the base coat with a couple of thin washes of chestnut ink. The metallic areas, such as the helmet and the axe head, were first given a base coat of black, and this is just going by the older recipes as well, and this was followed by Nostalgia 94's bolt gunmetal. I then gave the silver metallic areas a wash of some thin downed armor wash, also from Nostalgia 94, and while this was drying it did give me a bit of a chance just to see how that blue axe handle was sitting, and in the end I just went over it with a cream colour and then went over it again with a red, just to match the already red themed army that I have going. I think given that the army already has red weapons and trimmings, I just feel like the red goes a little bit better with the rest of the army just compared to the blue, and it also looks a bit more, maybe a bit more menacing. To paint the flagstaff, I just used a 50-50 mix of bruised purple and throwing shade blue by Troll Trader paints. Just to create a bit more dimension in the flagstaff, I just used some really thin down black and just painted this or glazed this into the sort of chipped out areas into the actual flagstaff itself, and this just helped build a bit of soft shadow just to give it a bit more dimension. To finish off the flag, I just painted all the exposed areas from cutting it out in black. To finish the model, I used the tried and trusted method of putting a layer of PVA glue on the top, dipping it in some fine sand, and then finally finishing off the base with that classic goblin green. And then finally, I gave it the extra touch of nostalgia it needs by giving it a quick photo shoot with a classic blue gradient background, faffing about in Photoshop for a little bit, forgetting how to use the text in Photoshop. Third time's the charm. I give it a little white border, and here he is. And that's it. Thank you so much if you've stayed awake this far, and I'll see you around next time.